arrogant humanity always believes that towering mountains are nothing but inanimate piles of rock, existing merely for tourists to check in and show off, completely oblivious to the fact that there is a peak in Northern California that has spent the past 1,000 years doing nothing but psychologically manipulating us. It despises the thrill-seeking mountaineers and the boring scholars clutching their measuring instruments. On the contrary, Shasta beckons to those who feel something screaming, clawing, and urging them to come closer. Everything begins like a slimy bout of sleep paralysis in the dead of night, and ends in a deranged religion of their own making. Isn't it laughable? Tens of thousands of people from every corner of the globe, bringing with them all sorts of backgrounds from every walk of life, have dragged their bodies to the foot of this solitary, barren volcano, only to utter the exact same truth in different words. There is something living down beneath it, something ancient, older than the pages of history we so smugly write for ourselves. As someone who has spent far too much time leafing through these moldy files, I have realized an ironic truth. The deeper you dig, the more you try to turn your back, walk away, and comfort yourself with the thought that this is just a pile of garbage fairy tales, the harder it drags you down into the mud. So, casting aside the lazy explanations of modern science, what is truly groaning behind the dark velvet curtain, deep beneath the flesh and bone of this colossal monster? Welcome to Dark History. I am Zorro. If you accidentally clicked on this video just looking for a monotonous voice to lull you to sleep, then congratulations, because planting nightmares is exactly why I am here. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and while we're talking, drop a comment down below to let me know, where are you hiding right now and what time does your clock say? Because in the place we are about to go, time simply does not exist. Let's talk about the physical structure of this monster. Mount Shasta rises 14,179 feet, about over 4,300 meters above the ground. But the key point doesn't lie in its height. It lies in its isolation. Most of the mountains you know are pack animals. They are part of great mountain ranges, sharing every ridgeline, every valley, resting upon one another to survive. But Shasta is different. It stands completely isolated from the rest of the Cascade Range. It stands there, solitary, arrogant, in a cold and sharp way that gives you the feeling it was intentionally pinned down to this land by an invisible hand. The indigenous people, those who breathed this air thousands of years before the white men in suits arrived with maps, recognized that. They didn't call this isolation a geographical coincidence. Coincidence is the lazy vocabulary of modern science. They called it the presence. And they built an entire massive cosmological system just to decipher the meaning of that presence. But we are moving a bit too fast. As a detective of history, I don't like jumping straight to conclusions. Before we take our picks and shovels to dig up what is lurking beneath the mountain, we must dissect its flesh first. Because Shasta's geology doesn't just bind the mystery, it is the very fatal flaw of that mystery. Shasta is a stratovolcano, a masterpiece molded from layers of hardened lava, ash deposits, and pyroclastic material accumulated over a bloody process spanning 600,000 years. You think it's dead? No. Its last major eruptive activity occurred only about 300 years ago, and it was still sneezing and sniffling with small eruptions right at the beginning of the 20th century. This mountain knows how to breathe. If you walk on its slopes, you will see it riddled with fumaroles. Jagged mouths are spewing thick, pungent sulfur gas from some dark place deep beneath the crust. Hot springs bubble frantically around the foot of the mountain. Above is a freezing, stark white blanket of snow. Below is a boiling, fiery geothermal heat. This clash creates a battlefield where the boundary between solid rock and empty space is constantly torn apart, twisted, and reshaped. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the first geological fact that makes even the most conservative scholars break out in a cold sweat. The lava tubes. Imagine this. When molten basaltic lava erupts and crawls across the ground, the outer layer exposed to the air cools and hardens, but inside its core remains a raging, fast-flowing river of fire. When the internal flow finally drains out, what is left behind is a hollow carcass, a massive stone tunnel. These ghostly capillary systems exist all over the world, from freezing Iceland to vibrant Hawaii. They can be miles long. There are sections where the ceiling is so high you can walk upright as if strolling through a shopping mall. They branch, twist, and stack on top of each other into incredibly sophisticated, multi-layered labyrinth systems that take humans years, even decades, to map. And California, of course, has these lava tubes. The area around Shasta possesses all the perfect conditions to give birth to tunnel systems on the scale of a kingdom. Yet, ironically, the underground network of Shasta has never been fully mapped. Why? Because the terrain above this mountain is of a nature that wants to eat alive any curious soul. It is rugged, fractured, and many areas are stamped special permit required by the government for access. Other regions are simply a death sentence for any systematic expedition. So, everything we know about the structure beneath the skin of this mountain consists of mere scattered fragments, a few blurry remote sensing images, some boring seismic analysis graphs, and stories. Yes. Stories from those who risked their lives to step into the darkness to search. And this is when our play truly draws its curtain open. Let's turn back the clock to the late 19th century. I need you to clearly understand the context at that time. The 1880s and 1890s were an era when humanity was running a fever over lost civilizations. Heinrich Schliemann had just dug up Troy from the dead. The temple ruins of the Maya in Central America were appearing everywhere in the newspapers, and in particular, Theosophy, a spiritual movement reeking of occultism, revolving around ancient wisdom hidden by secret societies, was spreading like an attractive virus among the intellectual elite from Europe to the Americas. In other words, the crowd back then was highly thirsty for mystical stories, and they were ready to swallow whole anything that looked like a great discovery. But if you carefully read the earliest records of Shasta, you will see they are nothing like the cheap fabrications of traveling quacks selling medicine. They are honest, raw, and sometimes intensely confused accounts from eyewitnesses trying to express something their brains could not digest. The first explosion in the press appeared in 1884 in the Eureka Journal, a ragged local newspaper serving the residents north of the mountain. The author was Frederick Spencer Oliver, a miner who dug through soil and rock day and night near the foot of Mount Shasta. Oliver was not a poet, nor a dreaming clergyman. He was a miner. People in this trade are extremely practical, hands full of calluses, and have no time for illusions. Yet Oliver submitted a report recounting a series of bizarre encounters. He swore that he saw entities unusually tall. They wore long robes, stark white or pale in color, strolling near the lower mountain slopes during the two most obscure times of the day, dawn and dusk. They didn't bother to glance at him. They ignored the existence of the people around them, and then, right before the eyes of the slack-jawed miner, they vanished without a trace into the cliffs, the bushes, leaving behind not even a single scraped footprint on the ground to show where they had gone. The sharpness of the story lies in this. Oliver never claimed they were demons or gods. He firmly asserted they were humans, flesh and blood humans, living a secret life somewhere right inside the bowels of the mountain. Later, Oliver wrote a book titled A Dweller on Two Planets. He claimed this book was not of his own invention, but was channeled from an ancient spirit dwelling on the mountain. I know what you're thinking. Hearing the word channeling, mainstream historians immediately smirk and throw the book straight into the trash. Too easy to dismiss. But wait, linger for just a moment. If you take the trouble to rummage deep into that strange book, you will find hair-raisingly detailed descriptions of underground architectural systems, mechanical ventilation shafts, and a completely self-sufficient, isolated society beneath the earth. Remember, Oliver wrote these things decades before the wave of Shasta mythology exploded. He, an uneducated miner, had absolutely no cultural template or sci-fi novel to copy from. Where did he get those sharp technical details from? It doesn't prove he was telling the truth, but clearly it was a spark too enticing to be extinguished. At the same time, Oliver was telling his story. On the western flank of the mountain, gold panners, those who waded all day in streams and shallow gullies, began whispering about something worse than visual hallucinations. It was the sounds. They didn't hear it with their ears. They felt it. Through the leather boot soles pounding against the boulders, a vibration traveled from their feet to the top of their heads. A dull, ultra-low frequency hum, suddenly appearing and then evaporating without a trace. No physical cause was present on the surface. Many men in different locations at different times, completely unknown to one another, reported exactly the same phenomenon. These vibrations reached a peak when they approached specific cliff structures and went abruptly silent when they stepped back. Geologists of the time quickly jumped in to reassure the crowd. They rubbed their hands, pushed up their glasses, and pronounced authoritatively geothermal activity. Raging hot fluid streams chuckling and winding through underground fissures. High-pressure gas streams finding an escape route, creating a hiss. It was a neat, clean explanation, perfectly matching the textbook standard, and perhaps it was true for a few cases. But here is the issue that kept those scientists awake at night. Their explanation could never account for the rhythm. Many witnesses asserted that the sound and vibration were not the chaotic hissing of nature. It was steady. It was rhythmic. It bore the character of a massive mechanical engine roaring beneath millions of tons of boulders. The scientific community tried to shove a square peg into a round hole with their geothermal explanation. But at Shasta, conventional patterns are always broken. Those were just the mountain's first whispers. As the 20th century opened, things no longer stopped at underground hums or white-robed ghosts at twilight. Lights began to flash. Gold nuggets began to be used to buy bread, and the curious began to disappear. Entering the early 20th century, the whispers around Mount Shasta were no longer a stealthy sound in squalid saloons. It had swollen into a bloated tumor, attracting the attention of muckraking writers and investigators from all over. They didn't just happen to pass by. They caught the scent of money and fame from this mountain. The most prominent among them was Edward Lancer. In 1932, this journalist dropped a bombshell in the Sunday magazine of the Los Angeles Times with a long, drawn-out chronicle titled California's Mystic Mountain. Lancer wasn't writing fiction. He dragged his body all the way there, carried his notebook, and sat down to directly interview the residents of the Shasta region. The picture Lancer painted from those interviews was terrifyingly consistent. You have to clearly understand who the people he was talking to were. They were dirt-poor farmers with mud-stained hands. They were lumberjacks with biceps as big as saplings. They were gruff, dry grocery store owners. In short, they were practical people down to the core, folks who would rather worry about the price of a loaf of bread than invent a mystical legend for no reason, because the mountain's demonic reputation didn't pay their bills. Yet every single one of them swore up and down to the exact same phenomenon. They saw lights. At midnight, strange streams of light silently glided across the high mountain slopes. Don't be quick to type and claim it was campfires or the flashlights of lost backpackers. No. These lights moved in clearly deliberate mathematical patterns. They crisscrossed, stopped, then darted off at unimaginable speeds, and most terrifyingly, they appeared at deadly altitudes where absolutely no trails existed. Did you fly, or did you grow wings to take a stroll up there? But it didn't stop at spots of light. Locals began to tell of direct encounters right in the gloomy forests near the foot of the mountain. They ran into strangers. These individuals spoke a broken English with an accent that belonged to no region in the United States. They wore strange clothes, flashy or elegant in a way that was completely out of place in such a treacherous wilderness. They casually walked into town grocery stores, bought provisions, and instead of paying with dollar bills, they clattered raw, unrefined gold nuggets onto the counter. And when the store owners tried to press them on where they came from, they only responded with a silence as cold as a drifting iceberg. Naturally, human greed and curiosity are a form of poison. A few local young men decided to tail these wealthy guests when they headed back into the forest. The hunt began. But the result? It always ended in madness. In a sparse terrain, with no caves or bushes large enough to hide in, those being watched evaporated. Literally, no campsite was ever found. Not a single footprint or broken blade of grass leading in a clear direction. It was as if the ground had opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. Journalist Lancer himself asserted nothing. He was just a megaphone. But the message was all too clear. There was some community rooting itself into this mountain. A society completely isolated from the common folk on the surface, and the belly of the mountain seemed to provide them with everything needed to survive. Now, let's play devil's advocate for a bit. As a storyteller, I won't force you to swallow this pile of mysteries without giving you the antidote of modern science. Let's see how respected scholars have tried to demystify this mountain. The robed figures. Those robed figures walking around the mountain in the mid-20th century. Oh, it's highly likely they were just followers of the I Am religious movement, founded by a guy named Guy Ballard in the 1930s. This guy turned Shasta into his holy land. His followers actually wore bizarre ceremonial robes, actually held dancing and shouting rituals on the mountain, and behaved like lunatics in the eyes of the locals. This explains a large volume of the stranger sighting reports. 1 point for logic. The ghostly lights. Science snaps its fingers and calls it an atmospheric phenomenon. Mount Shasta is so colossal that it generates its own weather ecosystem. Lenticular clouds trapped on the summit sometimes create optical effects that trick the eyes. Then there is ball lightning, and then something called earthquake lights. When massive blocks of rock are tightly compressed underground, they release electromagnetic effects, forming dazzling streaks of light shot straight into the air. The mechanical roars. Simple. Geothermal. As I mentioned in the previous part, Shasta is by no means dead. The shifting of hot fluids and high-pressure gases inside its bowels can create low-frequency resonance, identical to the sound of a massive engine running underground. See? Everything is explained neatly, cleanly, smelling of academic prestige. You can turn off the video, breathe a sigh of relief, and go to sleep in peace. But if science is so wonderful, then this is the moment I smash their mask. Science is sometimes like a drunkard looking for his keys under a streetlight, simply because the light is there, not because he dropped them there. Their explanations sound reasonable, but they deliberately ignore massive patches of darkness. They do not mention the reports of well-trained proper geologists and geographers in the 1940s. These experts hauled measuring equipment onto the lower slopes and happened to discover cave entrances that completely did not match any lava tube structure ever classified by humanity. These doors led into underground corridors shaped too perfectly, too square, and defined to have been born from the randomness of a lazy nature. They do not mention the countless testimonies from independent witnesses who didn't know each other, but pointed to the exact same coordinates on the northern face of the mountain. There lies an extremely wide rock ledge marked by an anomalous stone structure. Witnesses swore they saw the mountain open and close at that very spot. A massive mechanical stone door. Human shadows stepped inside and never came back out. More horrifyingly, if you take a thermometer to that rock ledge, you will find that the temperature difference between the ground and the surrounding air is always extreme and never changes, regardless of the weather outside. An underground world's ventilation system, perhaps? And finally, the biggest thing that scientific arrogance refuses to mention is the voices that echoed thousands of years before any white man set foot in the Americas. People who had no concept of Lemuria, aliens, or modern conspiracy theories. People carrying the very blood of this land. And what they recounted will make all your skepticism shudder. But that happens to be the third door we will have to walk through in just a moment. The greatest arrogance of modern humans is that we always think we are the first to know everything. We carry around a few computers, satellites, and default to the assumption that we hold the absolute truth. But if you bother to shut up and listen to the oral traditions of the peoples who lived resting against this mountain thousands of years before the European ships docked, you will find that the truth is often much bloodier and darker. The Shasta, the Madak, the Akimawi, the Wintu, the Karuk. Remember these names well. They were not a unified bloc. They spoke languages so different they couldn't communicate, had separate bloody histories, worshipped different gods, and built completely independent social structures. They didn't share a forum or social network to discuss and copy each other's legends. Yet, when mentioning the colossal volcano on the horizon, every single one of them pointed in the same direction and described exactly the same anomalous truth. Shasta is a forbidden zone where the physical laws of the surface world are torn to shreds. It is a place where the living and the dead walk the same path, where spirits reign, and a pocket of space where time flows in a completely warped rhythm. This spine-chilling alignment is not something you can wave away as a coincidence. They arrived at the same conclusion because for tens of thousands of years, they had always been facing the exact same thing lurking inside the mountain. The Wintu are the ones holding the most terrifying and specific fragments of memory. They do not describe the mountain's inhabitants using vague spiritual metaphors. No, they say it bluntly. There is a tribe of people living inside the bowels of the mountain, in the flesh. They travel between the underground world and the surface through secret portals known only to the guardians of the mountain. Across dozens of generations, the Wintu have always described these underground dwellers as oversized, tall beings. Their skin was pale, yet emitted a bizarre artificial aura. They didn't wear bear skins or clothes woven from weeds. Their clothes were woven from a type of material that people on the surface had never seen. They possessed healing technology beyond imagination, and most importantly, they were not bloodthirsty at all. Occasionally, very rarely, they emerged onto the surface to bring a warning, a piece of knowledge, or strange metallic objects that did not belong to this world. The Modoc had a different approach. They considered the mountain the mansion of the Creator. They didn't call the underground dwellers aliens, but viewed them as a primitive race, an ancient lineage that took root here before the earth was even fully shaped. Meanwhile, the Akimawi spoke of a system of underground highways, intricately intertwined tunnels connecting Shasta to other distant locations. It's like knowing there is a subway line running beneath your house. You don't own it, you don't dare step down into it, but you know full well it operates all night long. Let me tell you a story. A story not meant for entertainment, but for you to feel the weight of oral tradition. Takakota, a 7-year-old boy, sat huddling by a tiny fire next to his grandfather at the foot of the ancient mountain. The grandfather was a living archive, the final link in a lineage that had existed since before humanity learned to write. Above them, Shasta's summit was stark white, like fangs cutting through the night sky. The grandfather didn't look at his grandson. He stared fixedly at the mountain. In a thick voice, he recounted the moment when his own grandfather was still a young man. Back then, a strange man stepped out. Not from the forest, but from the earth, where the rocks closed together. The stranger carried no weapons, showed no fear. He brought a life-or-death message. A massive drought was about to strike. The message was so detailed it taught the villagers how to relocate their farming areas and how to dig wells to store water at depths never tried before. The horrific drought struck exactly as prophesied, sweeping through neighboring villages, but their tribe survived. When the innocent Takakota asked, "Grandpa, what did that man from the earth look like?" The grandfather sank into a deathly silence. Only a long time later did he speak. He looked like someone who had never had to worry about being burned by the sun. The pattern is there, my friends. The mountain is imprisoning something, and sometimes those captives find a way to reach their hands out into the light. If native legends make you feel like you're listening to fairy tales, then buckle your seatbelts because science and greed are about to enter the play. The year is 1904. A massive British mining company named Sunnyside Gold dispatches a geological expert to Northern California. His name is J.C. Brown. Damn it, this is no sleepwalker. Brown is a pragmatic old fox, a seasoned mineral hunter who has torn up earth and rock in Montana and British Columbia. He only cares about one thing: money. Gold veins worth breaking mountains for. But Brown's survey on the northern and western flanks of Shasta led him to something that could not be converted into standard currency. While taking measurements, Brown accidentally stumbled upon a series of concealed cave openings. And when he stepped inside, his worldview shattered. What Brown found were not rough, bumpy, natural lava tubes. They were tunnels carved with astonishing precision. The walls bore the marks of a systematic shaping industry. The diameter of the tunnels was perfectly consistent, stretching far into the void, and the floors smooth as glass, a smoothness born from being leveled by machinery, or from millions of bare feet rubbing back and forth over a span of time stretching to eternity. Deep inside, Brown found relics, exquisitely carved stone tablets, forged metal components, and colossal statues displaying an artistic style that had absolutely no connection to any pre-Columbian civilization across the entire continent. Standing in that silent darkness, what did the practical expert do? He took notes frantically. He drew sketches, picked up a few tiny specimens. Then he turned back, filled in the cave entrance, sealed the way in, marked it with a cipher on his personal map, and remained silent as a grave. No report to the company. Not a word breathed to the press for 30 long years. Until 1934. By this time, J.C. Brown was an 80-year-old man with one foot in the grave. Perhaps out of obsession, perhaps because he felt death knocking at the door, he decided to blow the lid off everything. Brown contacted a historical research organization and offered to lead an expedition to reopen that gate of hell. Hysteria exploded. 80 people, including academics, reporters, treasure hunters, equipped themselves with firearms, cameras, picks, and shovels, ready to follow the old man's footsteps and write their names into history. But you already know this mountain script. It doesn't allow anyone to pocket evidence and take it home. That expedition never took place. Just days before departure, J.C. Brown suddenly dropped dead. No deathbed words. And laughably enough, every single treasure map, every secret notebook recorded over his 30 years, completely evaporated from the scene. Not a single trace in any archive or drawer. The 80-man expedition disbanded in utter bewilderment, leaving the story to turn into a hazy ghost passed down through generations by word of mouth. This is exactly when serious researchers want to smash their keyboards. The anatomy of what happened to Brown, the deathly silence, the deathbed confession, the timely death, and the disappearance of evidence. It is a pathologically recurring pattern at Shasta. Is it the random operation of bad luck? Or is it because the mountain's guardians always know how to clean up curious meddlers right before the truth is exposed? And when science fails, that is when figures wrapped in religious robes step in, bringing a new myth, dressing the mountain in a dazzling yet deceitful shroud. A myth named Lemuria. Entering the 1930s, while the corpse of geologist J.C. Brown was not yet cold, a new force jumped in to scramble for a slice of the pie called Mount Shasta. It was the Rosicrucian Order, a secret society heavily redolent of philosophy and occultism with roots in 17th century Europe. They proudly declared to the public, Mount Shasta is precisely a communication station, a trade portal between Earth's surface and the civilizations living underground. And they named the creatures hiding in the bowels of the mountain with a designation that would haunt Shasta's history forever after. Remnants of Lemuria. Have you ever heard of Lemuria? The history of this name is laughably bitter. In the 19th century, before humanity understood that the Earth consisted of drifting giant tectonic plates, scientists scratched their heads over a puzzle. Why could lemurs appear in lands separated by thousands of miles of ocean? To solve this stupid riddle, they drew up a massive continent connecting the land masses and named it Lemuria. Later, when plate tectonics was born, the scientific community threw the map of Lemuria straight into the trash. But you know how it goes. Whatever science rejects, religion picks up and canonizes. Helena Blavatsky, the high priestess of the Theosophy movement, picked up the name Lemuria. She molded it, puffed it up into a civilization, a root race, possessing a transcendent state of consciousness that existed before modern humans even learned to walk on 2 feet. According to her theory, when the surface began to get crowded with us primitive humans, the Lemurians left in disdain. They slipped away underground, sealed the doors, and built an eternal empire beneath the Earth's crust. Friends, that is a myth. 100% a patchwork religion without a single bone fragment or archaeological brick to prove it. But here is the terrifying thing, the deadly trap I want you to see clearly. The Lemurian myth did not create the mystery of Mount Shasta. It parasitized it. It flew in, took root in a place that already had thousands of years of native traditions about those underground, and it swallowed that truth whole. It draped the dark entities of the mountain in a dazzling spiritual cloak called New Age. From that point on, everything became an unentangling mess. When a Wintu person speaks of the glowing ones, are we hearing the primal truth, or has it been warped through the Lemurian lens of the white folks recording it? That is the tragedy of Shasta. The truth, whatever the hell it may be, has been buried under the thick mud of cultural bias. By the mid-20th century, Shasta became a magnet, drawing crowds of spiritual tourists. They came, closed their eyes, and saw exactly what they wanted to see. A colossal syndrome of confirmation bias. But among those praying in robes, there was another group of visitors who didn't believe in Lemuria, didn't carry prayer beads, but instead brought blueprints, explosives, and rifles. American soldiers. As early as the 1940s, military personnel stationed at isolated training facilities in Northern California whispered hair-raising stories into one another's ears, not about mystical streaks of light, but about things reeking of metal and war. Veterans, well accustomed to the brutality of reality, whispered to each other about accidentally stumbling into massive underground installations. Some were ancient stone tunnels, but others were actively being poured with concrete. Turn your historical radar on. The period from the late 1940s all the way to the 1960s was the era of the Cold War. That was when the United States and the Soviet Union aimed nuclear warheads at each other, hands hovering over the button. Paranoia gripped the world. The U.S. government secretly poured billions of dollars into hollowing out the underground of the West, constructing doomsday bunkers. The NORAD base beneath Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado was just the cover shown to the public. What about the things kept hidden? Northern California didn't make the headlines. But look at Shasta through the eyes of a military strategist. It sits in the middle of nowhere. The access is treacherous, scattered with wild beasts and severe weather. Most importantly, its complex geological nature, with continuous seismic activity, serves as a perfect smokescreen. You could easily detonate tons of explosives to dig tunnels without anyone knowing, because the academics would just claim the mountain is having a geothermal shudder. Not to mention, the endless source of geothermal energy is entirely capable of running massive generators for an underground city operating self-sufficiently for centuries. So, is there any paper evidence that the government is hiding a fortress beneath Shasta? If you submit a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) request regarding this mountain, what do you get back? Stacks of documents where most of the content has been blacked out with thick bars of censorship ink. There are reports from former intelligence personnel vaguely hinting that certain areas around Shasta require an absurdly high level of security clearance just for the right to step near them. Why strictly protect an orphaned mountain of rock? What are they protecting from us? Or are they protecting us from whatever is down there? Thousands of years ago, the Indians chose to revere it and stay outside the boundary. Hundreds of years ago, Oliver saw strangers and J.C. Brown filled in the cave, taking his secret to the grave. Today, Lemurian seekers still sing songs on the mountainside, while military satellites coldly scan its jagged peak every night. Mount Shasta still stands there. It doesn't speak to defend itself. It doesn't care about names like Lemuria, the Wintu, or the Pentagon. It stretches itself 14,000 feet into the sky, weighing millions of tons of rock, down upon a truth that humanity, no matter how curious, has never possessed the strength to uncover. There is something down there. It is breathing. It is waiting. And you, do you dare to listen? Let's turn back the clock of time a bit to the mid-20th century. Shasta back then was a free playground. Prospectors carried pickaxes to find their fortune, and mountaineering enthusiasts camped all over the slopes. Then, a slam echoed. Not a physical sound, but the slamming of administrative doors. Vast areas around the mountain were suddenly locked down. Trails that used to be familiar suddenly grew prohibited area signs. What was the reason given? Pretty much around zero. No satisfactory public explanation. Did the government suddenly develop an intense love for conserving a few bushes at random coordinates? Don't be so naive. It was precisely this stealthy lockdown that draped Shasta in a fog of conspiracy theories. Amid the legends of ancient Lemurians or supernatural entities, we catch glimpses of something highly pragmatic, highly human: security operations. These two phenomena, the legends of non-human beings beneath the mountain and the cover-up by the military or government, are they parallel lines, or have they intersected at some blind spot? Current evidence: it is as silent as the volcanic rocks themselves. Yet, that silence is a piercing scream to those who know how to listen. Academia always beats its chest in pride, claiming they understand Shasta. Oh, of course they do. They have measured every inch of the surface, mapped out the detailed history of eruptions, analyzed the glacial layers, and measured the chemical composition of every droplet from the hot springs. They wear white lab coats, hold clipboards, and nod along with each other regarding the outer layers. But what about deep below? Beneath the bedrock strata, where drill bits cannot reach and seismic wave data begins to blur. That is a massive black hole of knowledge. What rare leaked seismic data manages to reveal paints an incredibly anomalous picture. This mountain is by no means sleeping peacefully. It sits squarely atop a subduction zone where the Juan de Fuca tectonic plate is being crushed and thrust beneath the North American plate, a meat grinder on a planetary scale. This horrific friction generates a colossal amount of heat, boiling magma chambers. Up to this point, it's still basic geology textbook stuff. But this is when everything begins to derail. Seismometers record long-period vibrations, the type of signals scientists usually associate with the movement of fluids, such as water or magma, through underground fissures. The problem is the heartbeat beneath Shasta looks nothing like any other volcano in the Cascade Range of similar size and age. The tremors are not continuous. They are intermittent, appearing and disappearing in time cycles that do not match any natural geothermal circulation model we have ever known. It does not look like the random movement of nature, but rather like a massive pump valve system being opened and closed intentionally. A complex underground structure creating distinctive seismic signals. What's more, look at the geological record, at the layers of lava this mountain has spat out in the past. Volcanologists have been forced to scratch their heads upon discovering gaps. I am not speaking of gaps in time. A volcano resting for a few thousand years is perfectly normal. I am talking about gaps in chemical composition. The erupted material shifts its characteristics abruptly and nonsensically. This tells us a chilling truth. The internal structure of Shasta is not a simple chimney. It is a massive, dynamic, continuously transforming labyrinth. The tunnels and giant magma chambers may have reshaped themselves over time, new spaces suddenly tearing open underground, while old corridors are sealed off forever. The subterranean architecture of this mountain is more complex than any blueprint a human could imagine. We are facing an ironic reality. Plenty of experts have gone on television and boldly claimed that there is absolutely nothing hidden beneath Shasta. But do you know what the truth is? They make that conclusion while holding not a single gram of actual data at that depth. Humans simply have never deployed enough seismic imaging technology with the resolution necessary to pierce through that dense crust. There is a chronic illness within the scientific community. They love to turn an absence of evidence into evidence of absence. But in the realm of dark history, we know full well that is garbage. In the case of Mount Shasta, it's not that we searched and found nothing. The truth is, we have never searched deeply enough to have the right to claim that. And while scientists are still arguing over models on paper, on the surface, direct encounters, strange and defying all conventional logic, have already begun to unfold. Encounters with those who do not belong to the surface world. In the summer of 1987, while most of America was intoxicating itself with thumping pop music and hair sprayed into massive volume, on the western slope of Mount Shasta, a woman named Carol Radin stepped into a fold of reality. She was hiking, alone, at an altitude far past the tree line on a rugged, barren trail that rarely anyone bothered to set foot on. Remember this detail carefully. Visibility in this area was completely clear. No matter which direction anyone approached from, you would see them from miles away. But as Carol rounded a bend, the man was right there. He sat perched on a protruding rocky ledge, as still as if he had taken root there since the Jurassic period. He hadn't come from any path at all. He had simply appeared. The man was tall, well above average height, dressed in a minimalist, pale-colored outfit tailored from an unknown material that belonged to no textile catalog of the surface world. He didn't even bother to glance at Carol as she approached. He was busy looking up at the mountain peak. But when he turned around, his gaze held no surprise. He looked at her as if he had been watching her hike up here all morning and was just waiting for her to catch her breath before starting a conversation. They talked for a full 20 minutes. And if you are expecting a sentimental sermon about cosmic love or salvation from little green alien brothers, well, sorry, you're on the wrong channel. That man's tone was cold, pragmatic, and heavily bureaucratic. He told her about the true geological history of the mountain, about a massive network of tunnels snaking directly beneath where they stood. And most importantly, he spoke about his community. He threw a bucket of cold water on the dreamers by clearly asserting, "We are not supernatural. We are not aliens. They were just humans. Humans who had made an extreme choice to turn their backs on our loud and trashy surface civilization. They chose a different set of values, built a society that prioritized completely different things, and maintained that isolation with a massive, deliberate effort." Before Carol's brain could finish processing this massive amount of information to utter any question, the man stood up. He looked at her, gave a formal, slow nod of farewell, and then stepped gently over the edge of the cliff. Panicked, she rushed straight to the rocky ledge. What do you think she saw? A mangled corpse at the bottom of the abyss? A paraglider? No, absolutely nothing. Only a vertical, smooth cliff dropping down tens of thousands of feet into a bottomless depth with no other path of escape. He had evaporated right in midair. A miracle? Or had the door to the tunnel system he just mentioned opened up and swallowed him in the blink of an eye? The reason Carol Ryden's story is worth our attention is that she is a clean witness. She wasn't a theosophy addict. She didn't trek up to Shasta searching for the aura of the lost continent of Lemuria. She was just hiking. The structure of her story, the unannounced appearance, the pragmatic information untouched by spiritual coloring, and the disappearance defying all laws of physics matches up with eerie perfection to dozens of other reports spanning over a century. But wait, to better understand this irony, we have to step back even further. Not by a few decades, but by thousands of years. Long before Spanish missionaries brought their crucifixes, long before American hunters carried shotguns to shatter the peace of Northern California. For thousands of years, indigenous Native American communities maintained a strange relationship with the mountain. The archaeological record, though scarce due to a lack of funding and a hesitation to encroach upon sacred land, has pointed to a highly peculiar settlement pattern. Traces of humans from 8,000 to 10,000 years ago have been found surrounding the mountain at various distances. But on the slopes themselves, absolutely absent. Or if present, pitifully faint. You might say, because it's cold and harsh high up on the mountain, who would want to stay there? You would be wrong again. Shasta has lower slope regions with extremely ideal climates where setting up tents and living would be completely easy. So why didn't they live there? This absence is distinctly intentional. Native oral legends state very clearly, the mountain is not a home. It is a sacred place, only permitted to be entered when performing rituals or for an exceptionally momentous purpose. You don't build a house in an operating room or on an altar, right? The indigenous people didn't live there because they knew someone else had already occupied this place, and the physical evidence has slapped straight across the faces of those who constantly deny it. Scattered throughout archaeological records right in the lower slope areas of the mountain, where native people passed down whispers that those underground will occasionally emerge. Things have been found that simply should not exist. These are artifacts crafted from types of stone completely non-existent in this region, knapped with techniques foreign to all known native cultures. They have even found processed pieces of metal sitting squarely in soil layers dating back before any metallurgical civilization in the entire region. They are pieces of a completely different puzzle, accidentally thrown into the box of American history. So, what did academia and the archaeological community do with these relics that possess the power to rewrite history? Oh, you know full well how they operate. Anomalies always make them itch and lose sleep. Instead of bravely facing them and letting the evidence challenge their rigid theoretical models, they chose the most cowardly way, to hush them up. The exotic stone projectile points, the absurd pieces of metal, all were shoved into tiny footnotes at the bottom of the page or thrown into supplementary data files that nobody bothers to read. Have you ever wondered what would happen if we swept away all the spiritual sleepwalkers, the junkies, and the white-robed cults from the Mount Shasta equation? One man did exactly that. His name was William Edwards. In the late 20th century, Edwards, an independent researcher, or in the sarcastic language of academia, a man with no degree, spent a whole decade gathering hundreds of Shasta reports spanning from the 1850s to the 1990s. Unbound by any conservative academic board, Edwards dug freely. He did something very cold-blooded. He threw into the trash every story that could be explained away by hallucinations, the I am religious movement or misidentification. What was left at the bottom of Edwards's sieve is what truly sends a shiver down one's spine. A collection of anonymous witnesses completely unknown to each other, having zero concept of the Lemurian myth, yet reporting the exact same phenomenon at the exact same damn geographical coordinates. The northern slope at an altitude of 9,000 to 11,000 feet, and the western base area near the hot springs. They heard mechanical sounds echoing from the deep that no geothermal pocket could ever produce. They stepped into zones where temperatures abruptly plummeted or skyrocketed without any geological logic. And most chillingly, they saw stones cut squarely, surfaces perfectly polished, peeking through the natural fissures of the mountain. Edwards cautiously concluded, this place is truly hiding a real phenomenon, something with a clear physical structure. Of course, his manuscript was never widely published. The truth is always shoved into a drawer. But if you think a few square stone blocks are strange, then fasten your seatbelts. We are going to reopen the yellowed police files of Siskiyou County from the summer of 1931. That year, the sheriff's office wasn't dealing with headaches over cattle rustling or saloon fights. They faced a rash of disappearances. But listen closely. The issue didn't lie in how they vanished, but rather in how they returned. The first case, a farmer on the eastern slope. He went out to check the pasture and evaporated for several days. When he returned, he didn't have a single scratch, wasn't panicked, and showed no signs of imprisonment. But something inside him had died, or had been replaced. His family described him as becoming hauntingly quiet, completely indifferent to his previous mundane worries. He lived for another 20 years, taking the secret of those missing days to his grave without uttering a single word. What did he see that made this surface world suddenly become so meaningless? The second case, a young female mountain climber. She returned a day later than scheduled, her brain completely stripped of any concept of time. She vividly remembered the feeling of being taken into a colossally vast space beneath the mountain. She wasn't tortured. On the contrary, she was treated with extreme care and was ultimately guided to find her way back to the surface. Her testimony is what's truly valuable. She felt as though she was only allowed to see just enough to know something exists, but absolutely not enough to understand what it is. A perfect cognitive manipulation. The third case. A gold prospector on the northern slope drifted down the mountain after being missing for 3 days. In his pockets were not rough, jagged gold nuggets caked in mud. He brought back manufactured gold bullion bars. Local jewelers dropped their jaws when examining them. The purity and alloy composition of this gold did not match any foundry on Earth at the time. The miner merely smirked and gave a single line of testimony. "I traded for them." Traded with whom? For what? What did the local police do with these 3 files? They clicked their tongues, shrugged their shoulders, stamped them strange occurrences, and shoved them into the archives because, well, nobody died. No homicide. No investigation. What a wonderful legal system, but science cannot easily shrug its shoulders like those lazy cops. Look at the groundwater and magnetic fields. The water spewing up from certain hot springs on the western slope has a chemical composition completely deviant from the volcanic rock on the surface. Do you know what that means? Water is the most honest messenger. This stream of water has flowed through some massive underground environment, sweeping past minerals that do not exist on the local geological map, before surging to the surface. It is carrying a receipt from a mysterious world right beneath us. Additionally, when taking magnetometers to this area, the compass needles don't stay still. They are thrashing about. The heart of the mountain is packed with localized magnetic anomalies. Do you know who usually walks around carrying magnetometers? The military and the government, when they want to survey sites to construct underground bunkers. The magnetic deviations expose colossal empty spaces, unusually dense rock masses, or aberrant metallic structures deep underground. These data points are fragmented, messy, and ignored, but if you piece them together, we are staring directly at the blueprint of an underground city rather than a mindless block of stone. A mysterious community, pure gold bars, magnetic signatures of vast empty voids. And now it is time for us to talk about the unlucky souls who actually tried to poke their hands into this hornet's nest, those who were spat straight out by the mountain. Now, let's talk about the brave souls, or to put it bluntly, the fools, who tried to charge straight into the mountain's lair. Throughout the 20th century, there was no shortage of individuals, from scientists hauling loads of cluttered machinery, spiritual fanatics, to adrenaline-fueled explorers who organized hunts for the Shasta tunnel system. And do you know what they found? Caves. Real stone entrances opening their pitch-black mouths at the exact coordinates reported by dozens of witnesses. Not an optical illusion, not light tricking the eye. Real caves. But here is Shasta's cruel joke. Most of these passageways led to a dead end, sometimes only a few dozen feet from the cave mouth, sometimes a bit further. They ended in solid, dense stone walls, bottomless abysses, or narrowed down to the point where even a mouse couldn't squeeze through. No grand underground highway system was ever exposed to the sunlight. Yet a few of them brought back something far more terrifying than a tunnel. Those were hair-raising experiences at that very physical dead end. Listen to the story of a veteran caver in the early 1970s. He had crawled through hundreds of cave systems across California, so don't be quick to label him a faint-hearted man. He found a cave mouth on the western slope. He went in 60 feet, made a sharp turn, and went another 40 feet. The path began to slope downward, and right there, as he stepped down the slope, he hit something that didn't exist. He described it as a forced wall, not rock, not a physical barrier. It was a sensation that brutally resisted physical movement, lying outside any mechanical laws known to man. He said it was like trying to walk through a Category 12 hurricane, yet that wind didn't move at all, nor did it have a temperature. It simply refused his presence. He took a step back, and everything vanished. He stepped forward again, and the wall slammed straight into his face. He surrendered, turned on his heel, and never, absolutely never, dared to go near those coordinates again. Other reports were no less chilling. Some people, upon reaching the end of the cave, were submerged in a bone-chilling cold. Others experienced cognitive disruption. Their brains suddenly froze up, losing the capacity for logical thought, and only recovered when they agreed to turn around and run. Or, most terrifyingly, a roaring, overwhelming sensation of rejection in the mind so intense that it acted like a layer of reinforced concrete slamming straight into the soul. Of course, psychological scientists will jump up and wave their hands. Oh, that's due to the cave environment. Darkness, oxygen deprivation, elevated CO2 levels, infrasound from the volcano messing up the nerves. Yes, that sounds highly plausible, if evaluated case by case in isolation. But they deliberately ignore a fatal detail: geographical consistency. Why do CO2 hallucinations or volcanic infrasound always lie in wait to strike humans at the exact dead ends where other witnesses previously reported seeing underground residents step out? If it were just a psychological disorder, it should happen at random. But no. This coincidence is like a giant neon no entry sign hung right in front of an invisible door. Now, I want you to do this. Close your eyes. Imagine you are falling, going deep into the bowels of the mountain, bypassing those shallow cave layers that amateur explorers always mess around in. Go deeper still. Thousands of feet of rock are weighing down on top of your head. The sounds of the world above are nothing but a mythical memory. Down here, darkness should be the eternal ruler, but no. The air here is warm, the warmth of deep geothermal heat embracing your bones. The air is circulating, meaning you are not in a sealed prison. It is a massive respiratory system, and the light doesn't come from your flashlight. It radiates an eerie glow from patches of bioluminescent fungi, from bacterial reefs that have evolved to feast on chemical energy instead of sunlight. Do you think this is science fiction? Is an underground civilization impossible? Open the history books and look at Cappadocia in Turkey. There, colossal underground cities were once home to tens of thousands of people living continuously over centuries. They constructed perfect ventilation systems, freshwater wells, and massive food storage chambers completely hidden beneath the ground. Cappadocia is ironclad proof. Humans can live inside the earth on a grand scale and have done so before. So the question isn't whether it's possible, but rather, what evidence do we have at Shasta? Let's bring Wishar S. Survey's ancient book, published in 1931, out into the light. Lemuria, the Lost Continent. Academia calls it spiritual garbage, a theosophical delusion. But what if we take a knife and shave away all the high-flown words, the mystical miracles, and leave only the bare skeleton of the story? The cold truth is revealed. Survey described an extremely pragmatic community. Their population was a mere few hundred people, not underground megacities. They practiced agriculture, pursued academic research. They lived in containment chambers linked together by tunnels, warmed by geothermal heat, and lit by luminescent algae. Their technology. Survey wrote that they completely avoided internal combustion engines or crude mechanical force. They utilized vibrational energy and manipulated sound. The crazy thing is, physically speaking, this description is far too perfect. A group of people choosing to live in deep caves over centuries would be forced to develop exactly this kind of technology. Fire and smoke from internal combustion engines would kill them instantly due to lack of oxygen. Evolutionary choice would mandate that they prioritize sound and geothermal power. Survey, intentionally or accidentally, wrote a blueprint for an ecosystem and survival logistics that cannot be refuted. And here is the finishing blow, the thing that smashes all illusions of wise Lemurian saints: their relationship with us. Survey described them in a way heavily reeking of geopolitics. They are not holy gods waiting to bestow cosmic love upon humanity. They are figures standing in the shadows, watching us with calculating eyes. They only intervene in the surface world when an event threatens their independence and isolation. Think of them as a micronation, ultra-secret, forced to live next to a giant, violent, loud, and nuclear-armed to the teeth neighbor, which is us. They don't want to make friends. They just want us to stay away from them. If you strip away the tattered religious cloak, you see a community acting with utter ruthlessness, coldness, and survival logic. And perhaps the force wall that threw that explorer out of the cave mouth that year was precisely their way of slamming the diplomatic door in the face of the human world. Shasta is not asleep. It is merely hiding a parallel reality breathing right beneath our feet. Do you think humanity's greatest secrets are protected by guns, men in black, or underground military bases? Oh no. Sometimes the most effective tool to extinguish the truth is astonishingly boring. A report pushed to the side, a threat of canceling a scholarship, and the cowardly silence of those wearing white lab coats. We always wonder about selective contact. Why do extraordinary things only occasionally leak a few drops of fragmented information to those on the surface? This separation, my friends, is not a mystical matter. It is a strategy. A chessboard where we don't even know we are pawns. The year 1987. The exact same year that the woman named Carol Ryden reported a spine-chilling encounter on the western slope of the mountain. In another corner, a completely different report took shape. Not from spiritual sleepwalkers, not from drunkards seeing hallucinations, but from the most practical minds you could ever find. A group of geology graduate students from a prestigious university in California. They didn't come here to look for aliens or ancient Lemurians. Their purpose was so bland it could be used as a sedative. Seismic monitoring, deploying equipment, collecting data, forecasting earthquakes. Period. On the second day of the survey, at an altitude of 10,000 feet, where the air is so thin it can make your lungs burn, a member of the team stumbled upon something that did not exist on any geological map. A hole. Or, more precisely, a surface opening so perfect it sent a chill down the spine. About 4 feet in diameter, nearly perfectly round, opening its mouth to snap up the meager winter light, leading into a tunnel, sloping steeply downward. If it were you, you might turn around and run. But they were scientists. Their instinct of curiosity outweighed their fear. 2 members switched on their headlamps, took a deep breath, and stepped into the throat of the mountain. Imagine standing in a space so colossally vast that the most powerful flashlight beam on your forehead was like a dying firefly, completely helpless in reaching the opposite wall. But that wasn't the craziest part. Look down at their feet. The floor of the chamber was perfectly flat. Don't confuse this with the natural flatness of limestone caves filled with thousands of years of sediment. It was smooth as glass, a terrifyingly smooth surface, heavily stamped with the mark of the hand of something that had crafted it, or had used this place for an exceptionally long duration, long enough to erode all the roughness of nature. And then they cast their lights upon the walls. Not the crude scratches of prehistoric man, not hieroglyphs. Across all the walls were repeating geometric shapes. Their precision reached such a degree that these 2 geologists had to exclaim, "No human hand carving freely could ever produce this." For a whole hour, their trembling hands snapped cameras continuously. They sketched. They took notes. Carrying evidence of a truth capable of reshaping all of human history, they climbed back to the surface and keyed their radio to call their faculty advisor. How do you think the esteemed professor reacted? Jump up and down in joy? Call the press? No. His answer was as fast as a slap. "You are forbidden from entering there again, absolutely forbidden from breathing a single word about what you just saw. Keep your mouths locked shut until you return to campus." And they complied, like good little children. When they stepped onto the university campus, what welcomed them was not an honoring committee. The photographs, their sole physical evidence, were confiscated immediately for analysis. They vanished, evaporated, exonerated. Finally, the verdict was handed down from on high. "Ah, dear students, those millimeter-precise symbols, just natural rock formations. Nature just made it that way. Stop questioning it." Natural rock formations. The clumsiest and most shameless lie that only those with the highest academic degrees possess the nerve to utter. The 2 members of the team that day realized a bitter truth. What's far more terrifying than the darkness at the bottom of a cave is the darkness inside academic institutions. Their geological careers ended. They voluntarily quit. Many years later, in the early 2000s, both of these individuals, completely independent of one another, any dared to recount the story to a journalist. They begged to remain anonymous. The greatest experience of their lives became a permanent psychological trauma, not because of that massive cave, but because of the way the monster called the system crushed the truth. You see, we love conspiracy theories. We love imagining organizations in black cloaks sitting around a round table to hide the world. But reality is far more brutal. Hiding archaeological anomalies doesn't require a supervillain. It only requires ordinary people acting out of personal interest. The professors, the funding grants, the universities, their entire careers, their entire livelihood is built upon an existing theoretical system. Any data that complicates that system, any cave containing geometric symbols that threatens to rewrite textbooks, they will be underreported, shoved into storage, blamed on mechanical error, or labeled natural rock formations. And Mount Shasta, with its inherently complex geology and ubiquitous spiritual rumors, inadvertently became the most perfect smokescreen. Because if you want to hide a tree, throw it into the forest. If you want to hide an anomalous truth, throw it onto a mountain already deemed a base for fanatics. The perfect move of concealment. But muzzling academia is easy. What about the people living around this mountain, those who breathe its air day and night? You can't strip a scholarship from a lumberjack or threaten to fire a farmer, right? You can't threaten to strip an academic degree from a lumberjack, nor can you threaten to cut off a farmer's funding grant. So, if you want to search for the rawest truth about Mount Shasta, leave the university lecture halls behind and step into the squalid saloons at the foot of the mountain. Weed, McLeod, and the very town named Mount Shasta itself. Their entire existence is molded by the colossal shadow of the mountain. On the surface, they are meccas for tourists, dreamers seeking spiritual enlightenment and a lifestyle that rejects reality. This mountain acts like a massive magnet drawing eccentric souls. That is a historical reality. But the local residents, those who have taken root here generation after generation, divide into three distinct factions. The first faction? They are sick and tired of the nonsense legends. To them, the mountain is just a massive block of stone, a mine of resources, a place to make a living. The second faction is more bewildered. They haven't seen anything themselves, but their neighbor has, and their biological aunt swears up and down that she's heard demonic sounds coming from underground. They stand on the fine line between skepticism and fear. But the third faction consists of the witnesses I love the most. Let's call them the pragmatic believers. They don't believe in the lost continent of Lemuria. They don't care about magic or charms. They are people with their feet firmly planted on the ground. They chop wood, drive tractors, pour concrete. But sometimes they see unexplainable lights. Sometimes they hear tremors missing from the seismic forecasts. They don't try to weave them into a cosmic grand narrative. They only know one chilling truth. This mountain is nothing like its cover. Listen to the words of a rancher, someone whose family has tilled this soil for 4 generations. You live near that mountain long enough, you won't even bother being surprised by weird things anymore. An event happens with zero explanation. You log it in your head, then go back to milking the cows. Maybe it holds some grand meaning, maybe it doesn't, but you are absolutely never allowed to pretend it never happened. You see, that kind of silent, native, atheistic testimony is precisely the most reliable. They don't write books for money, nor do they seek the spotlight. But book writers always know how to find them. Enter David Hatcher Childress, a scholar considered a thorn in the side of mainstream academia. This man has spent his life cataloging forbidden archaeology, a colossal collection of anomalies thrown straight into the trash by the textbook system. Childress's methods may be controversial. Sometimes his conclusions stray too far from the empirical evidence. But no matter how much you might dislike him, you cannot deny the sheer immensity of that catalog. And guess which place has the densest concentration of anomalous reports? Yes, Mount Shasta itself. Childress didn't just stop at some random hole. He strung them together into a bone-chilling network. A massive tunnel system bored straight through the bedrock, connecting Mount Shasta with critical geological nodes stretching all the way across Oregon and California. Chambers containing artifacts that could never be produced by the hands of nature. And most terrifyingly, an underground community of residents still living inside this colossal volcanic caldera, maintaining their lineage from long before the first white men set foot in the Americas. Childress didn't try to prove these things with mathematics. He gathered the fragments. He asked the questions that scientists didn't dare to ask. And do you know what? A few of those questions are as sharp as a razor blade. Why? Why do reports of anomalous underground spaces not just get stuck at Shasta, but instead trail along a sequence of geological features from South Shasta through the Sierra Nevada and into the desert sand dunes. Why do the oral legends of local indigenous tribes, cultures with absolutely no historical connections to one another, all speak of underground paths connecting these exact locations? And why? Why do the magnetometer charts at these locations display technical anomalies that match up flawlessly, hinting at colossal, artificial subterranean spaces? These are not fairy tales for you to blindly swallow. They are crime scenes. They need to be investigated. But sometimes, those who accidentally step onto the scene don't get the opportunity to investigate. Just like the two forest rangers in the dry summer of 1965. The summer of 1965 was a massive incinerator in Northern California. The forestry department had to exhaust all their strength patrolling the highlands, where a single cigarette butt was enough to turn the entire mountain into a giant torch. Two forest rangers, men seasoned with field experience, were trudging through an area that had just been swept by fire on the northern face. At an altitude of 10,500 feet, the air is so thin that you have to count every breath. Anyone who scrambles up here must carry a heavy-duty backpack of provisions. But the two of them stumbled upon something, or rather someone, completely absurd. A man sitting on a boulder, unarmed, without any gear. He looked more like someone who had just walked out of a cafe in the center of town than an adventurous mountain climber at a deadly altitude. The two rangers approached, hands resting on their gun butts by instinct, but the strange man didn't panic at all. He turned around, smiled, and spoke, a perfect, tranquil voice, completely untouched by any local accent. He even stated his name, a name that the forestry department later tore through every archive looking for, yet could find absolutely no trace of his existence. When asked, "Where are you from? And where are you going?" the man gave an answer that turned the blood in the ranger's veins ice cold. He wasn't a lost tourist. He claimed to be a resident residing right at this mountain. For the next 30 minutes, the two government officers listened to the most anomalous history lecture of their lives. The strange man spoke clearly about the ancient geological composition of the mountain, about the massive network of tunnels snaking beneath their feet, and about his community that was utilizing them. He spoke with the demeanor of a superior, explaining addition and subtraction to children, careless of whether they believed him or not, undaunted that they might handcuff him. And then the magic trick began. "I must head back. Take care, gentlemen," he said, then turned his back and stepped into an area with large exposed rock formations. The two rangers pursued immediately. The time gap, a few seconds. But as they rounded the boulder, there was no one. Vanished into thin air. The area was completely wide open, with no cave or hidden corner large enough for a grown man to hide so quickly. They rushed back to report. What do you think the higher-ups did? Dispatch helicopters? Send a SWAT team to scour the mountain? Of course not. The big boss gently received the report, filed it into a folder labeled Standard Anomalous Encounter. A beautiful piece of bureaucratic vocabulary used to bury things they didn't want to face. It was shoved into some dusty corner. Game over. Now, play a thought game with me. Disregarding space, let's talk about time. If you were a civilization that chose to burrow underground for centuries, how would you avoid degenerating into a pack of blind apes? The vital problem of isolation is not the lack of sunlight, but the preservation of knowledge, history, science, art, the things that define who you are. Look at the underground cities of Cappadocia with their stone libraries, or the underground vaults of ancient monks. Preserving knowledge at the bottom of the abyss requires a crazy and ruthless organizational effort. And that is exactly what witnesses at Shasta continuously report. The residents they encounter possess a colossal amount of knowledge, not just understanding of their cave, but extensive knowledge about the surface world, about our history, about events taking place tens of thousands of miles away from the mountain. Why would someone locked in a basement know so well about wars or empires on the surface, unless they are by no means passive, unless they have an active monitoring program, gathering intelligence, analyzing us? They maintain isolation, but they are not blind. That is not the behavior of timid hermits. That is the grand survival strategy of a sophisticated power at a disadvantage. Seeing through the enemy, intervening at an absolute minimum, and keeping silent to continue existing. But why burrow down there in the first place? Simple. Fear. Perhaps an apocalyptic event, a great primeval purge on the surface, forced them downward. But when you are down there long enough, fear evolves. Later generations born in the dark will no longer consider the surface home. The subterranean environment becomes their identity. We are not people of the surface. We are people of the inner realm. And do you think Shasta is unique? Oh no. The history of North America conceals puzzle pieces far more spine-chilling than that. Leave misty California behind and come to the scorching deserts of the Southwest. The Hopi Indians have always passed down a legend called Sipapu, the opening where their ancestors climbed up from the underworld. Scholars laughed, calling it a religious myth, until certain researchers packed their bags, followed the specific guidance of the Hopi, and actually found cave systems bearing traces of long-standing human use. And then we have the Anasazi, one of the most mysterious civilizations in the Americas. They built kivas, underground ceremonial chambers, connected to networks of tunnels that have never been fully mapped. Then one day, boom, they vanished. Completely disappeared. What do the textbooks say? Well, it was a drought. They starved to death. Does that sound convincing? A race possessing superb architectural engineering foundations, all too accustomed to the harsh desert environment, suddenly perishing due to a lack of water without even bothering to migrate? Unless they actually did migrate. The legends of the southwestern tribes state it very clearly. Their departure was not death. It was a deliberate relocation. Where to? Not to the east or to the west, but down. That's right, down into a world already prepared beneath the surface. A world that could connect from the arid desert all the way to the snow-capped volcano of Shasta via a colossal underground highway. If you were a curious soul simply browsing the underground forums of the 90s, you would find these things. Maps passed around within the community of people interested in Shasta. They outlined in detail the subterranean structure of the mountain, domed chambers, underground traffic hubs, highways connecting directly from California all the way to the northern volcanic region. No one knows who drew them. Some swore they were derived from indigenous legends. Others said they were documents leaked via the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. They could be fake. They could be the runaway imagination of fanatics. But look at their astonishing consistency. No matter how different their origins, The key points, cave entrances, grand chambers, all lie at the exact same coordinates. If this is a fabrication, it is the most highly disciplined fabrication I have ever seen. Either there is an architect behind it creating everything to blow a smokescreen, or, and this is the hypothesis that will keep you awake at night, they are all describing the exact same reality that they accidentally encountered. Look at them. The mountain climbers, the tourists seeking serenity. To them, Shasta is just a stunning landscape. They head down the mountain, satisfied with check-in photos and a sense of conquest. But there is always a minority. Those who descend the mountain with a prickling uneasiness in their chests. They sense that something is not right. A subtle vibration beneath their boot soles. A sudden temperature drop on deserted slopes where that coldness shouldn't belong. They hear dull hums, like the sound of machinery operating from deep inside the earth. Why do they stay silent? Because they are wise. They know that if they open their mouths about what they feel, the label of Lemurian fanatic will be glued tight to their foreheads before they even have a chance to explain. That mystical ghost has hijacked the descriptive space of this mountain. It turns every objective, honest observation into a joke. That is precisely the price of paranoia. It has made the search for the truth an impossibility. The people who saw the lights in 1932, those who heard the tremors in 1897, or the forest ranger in the 2000s who was reassigned simply for asking about an unnamed restricted zone on the map. They are not sleepwalkers. They are eyewitnesses to a secret protected by organized ignorance. Answer me one final question. If there truly were a community of inner realm people living at the foot of this colossal volcano, what would we expect to see? We would expect to see spine-chilling native legends. We would expect to see anomalous reports from the most practical workers. We would expect to see geological evidence that scientists label as errors. We would expect to see the quiet surveillance of government agencies over restricted zones that are never recorded in official documents. And ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what we are seeing. The puzzle pieces fit. Do not search for a god or an alien. Sometimes humanity's greatest secret is not among the stars, but right beneath your feet, hidden behind the volcanic rock you step on every day. But hey, don't go looking for that cave entrance, because there are places that are best left kept secret by history. When we dig up the hidden corners of history, especially in anomalous areas like Mount Shasta, we always expect to find systematic suppression efforts. But listen to me on this. The enemy of discovery is not always explicit prohibitive orders. The true enemy is a colossal, stupid, and sluggish institutional inertia. It is like a machine pre-programmed to steer our attention, and that of the crowd out there, away from those troublesome anomalies that threaten to endanger their textbooks. You and I both know humans are a funny species. We are biological machines craving to find patterns in a world already swimming in patterns. Sometimes we see things we want to see, even when they don't exist at all. A cloud shaped like a face, a shadow resembling a monster. Sure. And the mainstream scientific community often uses this exact argument, wrapping themselves in the cloak of skepticism to wave away all anomalous evidence. But this is when the joke turns bitter. That very skeptical argument, which sounds so rational, becomes the cheapest form of fallacy when used to reject the truth. Take Mount Shasta as an example. It is far too easy for a PhD sitting in an air-conditioned room to smirk and throw the Shasta file into the trash. Why? Because of the weight of what is called pop culture. Mention Shasta, and people immediately think of the legend of the lost continent of Lemuria, energy crystals, or stories steeped in New Age nonsense. This cultural fog is too thick, too frivolous, making the evaluation of physical evidence for what it actually is an impossible task for the faint-hearted. They reject the evidence not because it is wrong. They reject it because they are afraid. A glaring, cowardly fear. Fear of being laughed at by colleagues. Fear of being labeled a crackpot for daring to associate with a topic that seems ridiculous. But my friend, let me tell you a truth. Fear is never a valid epistemological reason to deny the truth. The only honest stance here is to acknowledge uncertainty. Something extremely, extremely anomalous is happening in the Mount Shasta area. What the hell is it? I don't know yet, and neither do you. But if we set all the nonsense aside, the most radical explanation, one that sends shivers down the spines of the scientific community, happens to be the most logical, an underground community existing for a very, very long time. You see, this hypothesis is brutally elegant. It explains a massive network of evidence without forcing us to twist things like all witnesses misremembered, or it's all just hallucinations driven by motivated cognition, or assuming that thousands of pages of documents were fabricated. It requires only one single thing: accepting that a parallel reality exists that we haven't officially stamped and approved yet. That is not a comfortable chair to sit in. Humans hate uncertainty. We like clear black and white stories, right or wrong, yes or no. When the true answer is, the evidence is real, but the explanation remains unclear, and the investigation is still ongoing, we usually fly into a rage. Mount Shasta is unresolved. The game remains open. And to play this game, some of history's most patient detectives have borrowed a razor-sharp blade, landscape archaeology. Don't yawn just yet, it's far more interesting than its dry name suggests. Landscape archaeology doesn't dig around for pottery jars. It studies how a human community shapes and is shaped by the physical environment around them. Imagine this. If you rent a hotel room for 2 days, you only leave behind a few strands of hair and a carelessly tossed towel. But if your family lives on a piece of land for 10 generations, that landscape is not just a dwelling place. It merges into the blood. It becomes the identity, the memory of the community. Natural features that outsiders see only as hills, mountains, or vegetation are, through the lens of time, subtly organized. They are named, maintained, possess distinct functions. And when people apply this method to the lower slopes of Shasta, something peculiar begins to take shape. They don't chase sensational claims. They look at maps. They search for topographical features that appear natural but carry the fingerprints of sustainable organization. The result immediately forces skeptics to bite their own tongues. Maps point out slope areas with organizational characteristics that cannot be explained by pure geology. It is not random. The exact same mysterious location repeated in the oral traditions of the native Wintu, strangely enough, matches down to the exact meter with the ragged logs of gold miners in the 1880s, and then continues to show up in 20th century encounter reports. A Wintu Indian from centuries ago and a drunk white miner in the 19th century. They shared no language, no culture, and certainly didn't gather around a campfire to coordinate a lie. Yet their fingers point to the exact same coordinates on Mount Shasta. This is not a conviction or final proof, but it is a harsh warning shot straight into our arrogance. It screams in the face of academia. If there is some ghost playing hide and seek here, this is exactly where we must dig down. That steering direction is real. That consistency is real, even if the thing being pointed at remains hidden in the dark. Dawn is breaking soon. Not quite, but in the warped logic of a long night submerged in painful questions, we are moving very close to the moment where you are forced to decide. Which truth will you carry forward, and which dogma will you leave behind? The mystery of Mount Shasta, my friends, is not a gift neatly wrapped with a bright red ribbon named the truth. It is sticky, messy, and it never spits out a clean answer. But what it does achieve is delivering a thunderous slap to wake us from our sleepwalking, exposing the true nature of knowledge in the decaying past, serving as the foundation for the present we so firmly believe in. Flip back through the yellowed pages of your textbooks. How did they inject the image of pre-1492 America into your head? Vast, wild, desolate lands with a scattering of primitive tribes dancing around campfires, right? The arrogance of the conquerors. The truth is, before the heels of European boots trod upon it, America was a densely populated land, organized with unbelievable sophistication. The people living there understood this land, down into the marrow of their bones. But that understanding was not framed within cold Western academic halls or scientific reports. It was deeply embedded within rituals, within oral traditions passed from generation to generation, within a symbiotic relationship with specific locations spanning thousands of years. Unfortunately for us, the majority of that priceless treasury of knowledge was slaughtered or hacked to pieces after the bloody milestone of 1492. The surviving fragments were stuffed into a shell that outsiders, those with practical mindsets, find highly difficult to access and incredibly easy to misunderstand. The Wintu, the Modoc, the Akamawi, the Karuk, they knew this mountain well. They ate, slept, breathed, and observed it for millennia. Do you think what they recounted are fairy tales to soothe children to sleep? A mistake. When they describe underground dwellers, they are by no means using a metaphor. Modern academia loves the word metaphor to evade what they cannot measure with a ruler. But for the indigenous tribes, they are calmly and precisely reporting a real characteristic of the world they inhabit. I am not telling you to swallow all their descriptions with naive, blind faith, but we, the arrogant latecomers, must examine it with extreme seriousness. We must lower our egos to understand it according to their exact framework of reference before rushing to stamp it nonsense, simply because it doesn't align with our narrow worldview. Because, my friends, numbers do not lie. The measurable geophysical anomalies at Shasta are real, lacking a satisfactory explanation. The archaeological anomalies are real, documented. The pattern of encounters, reported by a host of completely independent witnesses, patched together over more than a century, is real. The spine-chillingly precise geographical clustering of those encounters is also real. And that institutional barrier pattern of the authorities aimed at brushing off investigations, oh, it is truer than ever. Of course, our bewilderment at the meaning of this tangled mess is also real. But uncertainty is not a signal for you to let go of the steering wheel and give up. It is a siren demanding that you search more carefully, with sharper tools, and most importantly, with intellectual honesty. Reporting exactly what is found rather than molding it through a filtering screen of censorship to make it easy to digest for the crowd. Close your eyes and imagine, right now, somewhere in that dark tunnel system beneath millions of tons of volcanic rock, if they truly exist, there are humans living. They exist in a relationship with the world that our imagination cannot possibly reach. Beings who measure time with a different rhythm, understanding the internal structure of the Earth in ways that no geological institute has ever dared to dream of. They sit there, silently witnessing the world on the surface, our world, tearing itself apart, transforming, burning bright and fading away, without being tainted in the slightest. Or, there's no one there. You see, both of these answers are equally shocking and extraordinary. The first answer is obvious. There's another civilization beneath our feet. But the second answer? Good Lord, it is extraordinary in a far more morbid way. If there's nothing down there, does it mean that a century and a half of independent, eerily consistent testimonies gathering at the exact same geographical coordinates are all merely pointing into the void? Does it mean that the ancient traditions of countless unrelated tribes coincidentally encoded the exact same science fiction script? Does it mean that these native legends happen to match line by line with the hallucinatory notes of gold miners, fanatics, dedicated forest rangers, and naive geology students? That all the geophysical anomaly meters are merely short-circuiting because of a few random rocks? That the archaeological anomalies are just due to negligent researchers? That the continuous intervention and prevention by authorities is just a coincidence? That everyone who stepped into those underground passages and fled for their lives did so simply because they suffered from the exact same claustrophobic hallucination at the exact same spot? Do you think our brains can contain a coincidence so massive and ridiculous? No, that is far too many coincidences to swallow, unless you deliberately shut your eyes and ignore it. Look at it. That mountain stands towering at over 14,000 feet. It stands alone, isolated, proudly condescending above the surrounding landscape. It acts like a giant magnet pulling humans toward it, and then hurls at them experiences exceeding all conventional physical and psychological laws. It has been playing this game of manipulation since the day the first human loitered near the foot of the mountain. That is the most rock-solid truth about Mount Shasta, threading through all the evidence. The mountain does something to those who dare approach it. Not to everyone, not every single day, but the frequency is dense enough, sweeping across every demographic layer, every culture, every religious belief. The mountain forces them to confront a reality they cannot put into words. What is hiding inside that layer of rock? What is being protected beneath it? We don't know yet. But for God's sake, we must continue digging deep. By now, the skeptics out there must be rubbing their hands in satisfaction. Zorro, you are talking about seekers, gold-drunk miners, sleepwalking Lemurian fanatics, or overzealous spiritual researchers. They look for miracles, so of course they will see miracles. Fair enough. A decent argument. Psychological suggestion is a terrifying monster. But let me hurl another catalog of files in your faces. A catalog entirely capable of breaking any attempt at psychological rationalization. These are stories coming from people who weren't searching for anything at all. They don't know how to spell the word Lemuria. They don't care about native mythology. They possess not a single gram of interest in pre-Columbian civilizations or cosmic spirituality. They were just humans accidentally thrown into this area for the most mundane, ordinary reasons, and were then delivered a sensory shock by the mountain that to this day they still cannot explain. Picture this. A long-haul truck driver, exhausted, pulls his massive rig onto the shoulder of Route 97 in the pitch-black dead of night to catch some sleep. Around him is the darkness and silence of the mountain forests. He turns the key, shuts off the engine. But the moment the engine noise ceases, another sound begins. It doesn't echo off the cliffs. It resonates from beneath the asphalt. A rhythmic, steady sound, echoing like a giant machine grinding together. Thump, thump, thump. Not groaning like natural seismic activity. It possesses an industrial character. The driver lies frozen in his seat, breaking out in cold sweat, straining his ears to listen for a few minutes that stretch on like centuries. Then the sound stops. Terrified, he starts the engine and steps on the gas, tearing away as if chased by ghosts. For 20 years he grits his teeth and tells no one a word, fearing being tossed into an insane asylum, until he accidentally reads an article about Shasta anomalies and realizes he wasn't crazy at all. The office worker in Weed, or the story of a woman who moved to Weed, a dull little town nestled right at the foot of the mountain. She came here for a boring office job, completely unrelated to the mountain. Yet over the years, she would occasionally be startled awake in the middle of the night. The house was moving. Living in California, you know what an earthquake is like. It shakes violently and jerkily. But no, what she felt was a slow, deliberate shifting, a heavy crawling sensation, right beneath the house's foundation. Like a colossal monster, stirring and turning in its sleep. The next morning, she timidly told her neighbors, expecting an awkward glance. But no, they merely shrugged, took a sip of coffee, and casually said, "Oh, that happens to a few people in Weed from time to time. It's just the mountain." Just the mountain. They accepted that anomaly as if accepting rain in the summer. She never dared to look into it further. The glowing campground. And here, listen to the story of a bunch of teenagers camping on the lower slopes one summer night. In the middle of the night, they bolted upright because of light. But it wasn't moonlight, not a ranger's flashlight, nor reflected light. The entire ground beneath their tent was glowing. The earth itself flared up with an eerie light for a full 15 minutes. The next morning, panicked, they grabbed shovels and picks and dug up the spot. What was underneath? Soil. Just ordinary soil, mud, and tree roots. Whatever had lit up the ground that night left behind absolutely no physical trace. They weren't seekers. They were just living their lives. And the mountain, in the most nonchalant manner, used raw sensory experience to remind them the conventional explanations of this world are a cheap joke. This 14,179-foot mountain is not just a random geological mass. It stands isolated, separate from the rest of the range, as if it were placed there intentionally. The native tribes who have breathed its air for thousands of years never called it a location. They called it a presence, an entity with intent. Not intent like a scheming human, but the intent of something ancient. The mountain knows you are there. It responds to you. And guess what? science is beginning to crawl along behind what the native people knew since the dawn of time. Modern surveys acknowledge that volcanoes in geothermal active regions can generate extremely complex electromagnetic field, acoustic, and visual effects. That environment warps perception. The mountain is not alive in a dark, biological sense, but it acts like a massive machine directly intervening with the nervous system of beings lingering near it. The mystery lying beneath that rock layer is a grand intersection of geology, archaeology, history, and the inviolable truth of human experience. The tunnels remain unmapped. The chambers remain unlit. Those entities, if they truly exist, still refuse to reveal themselves to the sunlight. But there is something waiting down there. Something incredibly old, incredibly patient. It is waiting for our hollow surface world to develop enough capacity and enough honesty to dare look directly at it without blinking or backing away. We are not there yet, but the mountain isn't going anywhere, and seemingly, neither is the thing living inside it. There remains one final question. A thorny question throbbing beneath every other piece of evidence, exactly like the way the mountain itself rests upon the Earth's mantle. That is the question of continuity. How the hell can a community, a civilization, or a massive body of knowledge survive intact across so many centuries when right above their heads the surface world is constantly burning itself down and being reborn? Look at us. The Earth's surface is an arena of chaos. Proud empires rise and then collapse into ashes. Languages are swallowed. Peoples are slaughtered, displaced, and assimilated. The technology of the last century becomes the rusty trash pile of this century. Change is not only fast, it is destructive and catastrophic. We, the surface dwellers, are like moths rushing into the flame of time. But deep underground, the rules of the game are completely different. Don't misunderstand me. The environment down there is not some sci-fi utopia. The people down there, if they exist, still face death, aging, and even rebellious children defying their parents' rules. Social conflicts within an isolated, cramped space do not diminish. Sometimes they are sharper and bloodier, because the price of a breakdown is extremely expensive when you cannot simply pack your bags and leave. But think about the physical environment. A cave system warmed by terrifyingly stable geothermal heat. Temperatures never fluctuate with the seasons. Groundwater is not choked by surface droughts. Food sources within a geothermal ecosystem do not migrate. When you eliminate from the survival equation the frantic pressure of constantly adapting to storms, ice ages, or droughts, you release a massive source of energy. Where does that energy go? It goes into depth. It creates a civilization that prioritizes refinement and continuity. They have time to turn rudimentary knowledge into flawless art. Our academia prides itself on research spanning a few decades. Imagine a body of knowledge built up and protected intact over thousands of years without a single interruption. What would that civilization look like? It would certainly be small, because supreme cohesion can only be maintained on a small scale. It would be ruthlessly specialized, each individual a perfect machine for their role, and, in our eyes, they would look incredibly bizarre. Not savage or primitive, but a radical difference in ideology. They have a different timeline, a different value system. When startled witnesses recount encountering the people of the mountain, they always mention this strange quality. Neither superior nor inferior, just completely alien. A cultural chasm so deep that all our tools of communication become useless. You cannot bring surface logic underground. And this is when we must reopen the sacred geography of the indigenous people. The white-coated scholars often smirk when they hear this term, dismissing it as the superstition of tribes dancing and singing around campfires. How arrogant and foolish. The sacred geography of the Shasta region is not a dreaming Bible. It is an operational map. It is extremely detailed and ruthlessly practical. It doesn't say vaguely that this mountain is very sacred. No, it designates explicitly this coordinate is where you access a specific type of knowledge. That coordinate is where the boundary between two worlds becomes as thin as a sheet of paper. The Wintu didn't sit around with free time inventing stories about beings emerging from the bowels of the mountain. They saw it. They observed it across many generations, recorded the data, and encoded those raw data into legends to pass down to their descendants. That is not mythology. It is a knowledge management system that doesn't require written text. The operational content behind those stories is very clear. There are entities appearing from the heart of the mountain at marked points, possessing anomalous knowledge, and they interact purposefully. It is a physical phenomenon, not an allegory. But does modern science back down? Oh, there were once people who tried to use science to force the mountain to open its mouth. In the late 1980s, a private research group, stealthy, nameless, but possessing massive funding, hauled the most advanced tools to Shasta. They didn't perform rituals. They used ground-penetrating radar, GPR, magnetometers, and seismic profiling systems. They fired waves of acoustics and microwaves into the mountainside, operating covertly without a permit. And what secrets did the mountain spit out? GPR data showed colossal empty spaces lying outside all laws of natural geology. There were voids with organized square geometric boundaries, a glaringly artificial structure. Magnetometry pointed to zones of anomaly that didn't correspond at all to mineral composition. But most terrifying was the seismic data. Waves bouncing back from certain depths revealed the existence of abnormally uniform masses of material, the fingerprints of pre-processed stone or intentionally compacted soil. But guess what happened next? Before the research team could even pop champagne to celebrate, the Forest Service appeared, cold and decisive, forcing them to pack up their machinery and get the hell out of there. The data was later analyzed in secret, yielding conclusions so shocking that the group decided to seal it permanently instead of publishing it to the world. This story only leaked through an outer circle member in the early 2000s. Imagine you are standing at the foot of this colossal mountain. The air is freezing still, but deep beneath that volcanic rock layer, something is growling. Some scientists have tried to decode Shasta's mystery using a very elegant weapon, acoustic physics. Have you ever heard of infrasound? Those are sound waves lying below the 20 Hz threshold of human hearing. You cannot hear it, but your body can. Thanks to geothermal and volcanic activity, Shasta acts like a giant subwoofer of Mother Nature, continuously emitting these deadly ranges of infrasound. Recall the research of acoustic engineer Vic Tandy. He discovered that at the precise frequency of 18.9 Hz, infrasound can resonate and make your eyeballs vibrate frantically right inside their sockets. What is the result? Your peripheral vision is distorted. The edges of objects blur and inanimate shadows suddenly appear to be dancing. Worse, it implants a spine-chilling sensation into your brain, a sheer panic as if someone or something is standing right behind your neck in a place where conventional physical laws seem to have been thrown into the trash. A perfect and neat scientific explanation, isn't it? The mainstream scientific community must have rubbed their hands in satisfaction, closed the file, and gone out for coffee together. See, you fools. There is no mystery. It's just your eyeballs vibrating because of volcanic sound. But my friends, is anything in this world ever that easy? Infrasound might explain why you feel nauseous or see hallucinations. But tell me, what sound wave can generate face-to-face physical encounters? What sound frequency can leave behind glaring artifacts on the ground? And what giant loudspeaker underground can bypass sophisticated geophysical survey data? Infrasound is a fact. Its impact on human physiology is undeniable. But using it to explain the entire Shasta phenomenon is no different than using a personal band-aid to cover a bullet wound. It soothes a few minor symptoms, but the core of the bewilderment still bleeds. And this is when everything begins to become ironically interesting. Fast forward to 2008. Entering the stage is Joanna Martinez, a PhD candidate in cultural anthropology in California. She didn't come to Shasta looking for aliens or inner Earth people. She came with the mindset of a scholar studying the erosion and persistence of spiritual beliefs, specifically the I Am movement and the bizarre religious communities that have taken root around the mountain over decades. Martinez began recording interviews. She sat across from people who had dedicated their entire lives to the mystical faith of the mountain. But from within those recorded tapes, she stumbled upon something that would send a chill down the spine of any academic researcher. She found the truth hidden by the most fanatical people themselves. Do you understand the irony here? Normally, people with strong faith will attribute everything they see to deities. A streak of light gliding past? That's an angel. A black shadow in the forest? That's an ancestral spirit. But when recounting these experiences, their attitude completely changed. They hesitated. They lowered their voices. They were painfully reluctant. They spoke of confronting individuals, flesh and blood humans, stepping out from inside the mountain. There was no aura. There was no melodious music of utopia. These were physical encounters, cold and realistic, to the point of being stark. These people stepped out of the mountain, interacted with them for a few moments, then turned back into the heart of the stone. Imagine you are Martinez. You are listening to someone who can meditate all day to connect with the universe, suddenly lean forward, look straight into your eyes and use the rawest, most mundane words to emphasize that. No, miss. This was not a dream. This was not a spiritual experience. This was a real person, a real conversation, and they truly disappeared into the mountain. They completely separated this experience from their faith because they were smart enough to know if they wrapped it in a religious shell, everyone would view them as paranoid. They wanted to be taken seriously. So, what did Martinez do with this explosive body of data? She did exactly what the academic system required her to do. She hushed it up. Cha, Kong, Hanla, Jiao, Huan Tuan. Well, not entirely hidden. She did mention it in her dissertation, but shoved it into some dark corner instead of making it the center of her argument. Why? Because her thesis was on spiritual beliefs, not on there is a civilization living beneath the mountain. The academic theoretical framework she was trained in had no toolbox named people emerging from cliffs. And I don't blame her at all. Let's be honest with each other. Professional survival is a ruthless monster. If you want a PhD, if you want research institutes to fund you, you have to play by their rules. You must keep yourself safe inside the pre-drawn boundaries. When anomalous data appears and threatens to shatter your conclusions, you don't change the conclusions. You put that data away in a drawer. That is the most painful, darkest thorn in the entire field of anomaly research. The problem is not that people are making stories up. The problem is not that the human brain hallucinates due to personal motives. The core problem is institutions born to investigate the truth suffer from a terminal illness called structural impotence. They cannot investigate a phenomenon honestly because that honesty would lead to conclusions that their conceptual infrastructure simply cannot digest. We always believe that science is a torch illuminating the darkness. But sometimes the torchbearers themselves close their eyes tightly, simply because they are afraid of what the darkness might be hurling back into their eyes. Look down beneath your feet. Do you think that solid layer of earth and rock is a quiet, solid mass? If we are talking about the area around Mount Shasta, then you are dead wrong. Let me clarify a geological fact that many often overlook. Mount Shasta itself is actually just a latecomer. Compared to the ancient surrounding landscape, it is surprisingly young. The bedrock terrain beneath it was already aged and bore the scars of millions of years of tectonics before Shasta even had time to sprout from the ground. It already had its own geological history, giant caves, intersecting fault lines, and a subterranean hydrological system as complex as blood vessels. And then, the volcano erupted. Millions of tons of boiling molten lava surged up, constructing the massive body of Shasta that we see today. But here is the key point. That layer of lava did not flatten or wipe out the underground world below. It poured over the top, flowed around massive spaces, and inadvertently did a grand thing. It sealed them. The lava cooled, creating a reinforced steel-like dome roof, preserving the empty spaces below intact. Geologists call this structure a palimpsest. Imagine Earth's history here as like an old book. People don't tear out the old pages. They just write new lines of text over them. Layer upon layer of networks of passageways, giant underground rooms stacked on top of each other. If you think the caves humans can crawl into from the foot of the mountain are all that Shasta has, then you are far too naive. That is just the attic of a skyscraper cored upside down into the ground. The mountain is not an isolated house. The mountain is just a doorway leading into a vast territory far exceeding what its colossal shadow casts upon the ground. And this brings us to one of the craziest yet most logical mysteries: the tunnel network. Imagine a world where you can enter the earth halfway up Mount Shasta and step out at a cave mouth dozens of miles away without ever having to face the sunlight or the blizzards on the surface. A perfect underground transit system. Sounds like science fiction, right? But this is exactly what is recorded in the oral legends of the Achimawi and the native tribes that have lived in this area for thousands of years. Hokyeven hung chon juang ji dwoilong jat. They spoke of paths traveling underground, connecting sacred locations. They spoke of a vast network, not a dark cave where a group of people huddled together waiting to die. It is a portrait of a regional-scale underground civilization. You see, when hearing the concept of an underground city, our logical and skeptical brains will immediately raise a red flag. How do they survive? How do they farm? Where do they get air? A few hundred people trapped in a mountain would go extinct after a few generations due to inbreeding. True. If it were an isolated community beneath a single mountain, they would perish. But what if it were a network of communities connected to each other through underground tunnels, stretching across an area of hundreds of square miles? A network capable of sharing resources. This place has water, that place has mineral fungi, another place has geothermal power. A network that could maintain an entire civilization of thousands, even tens of thousands of people across millennia. Suddenly, the survival problem is no longer impossible. Now let's talk about ancient legends. Modern academia has an incredibly arrogant habit. They like to pat native cultures on the head, smile pityingly, and call their historical accounts myths, fairy tales, or spiritual metaphors. But let me tell you a secret of detectives. The oldest stories are often the most accurate ones. Not in the fabricated details, not in the imagery of gods, but in their structural framework. The traditions of native tribes are the most conservative information preservation machines on this planet. They don't have free time to invent sci-fi stories out of thin air and pass them down orally with precision, down to every comma across hundreds of generations. They pass down what they observed. And what did they observe? The earth opening up. Humans stepping out from inside the mountain. Knowledge exchanged between the surface world and the world below. Contrast that with what Joanna Martinez found at the beginning of the 21st century. The most recent reports, modern witnesses driving Fords and using cell phones, also describe an identical scenario. Humans coming from inside the cliff faces. Physical encounters. Exchange of information. A community living underneath. Words may change to suit the culture of the era, but the core of the matter stands still like a mossy rock. This spine-chilling continuity across eras, through different cultural lenses, across hundreds of generations, is what challenges any superficial explanation. We are being backed into a wall of reason. What is your choice? You can choose the easy way, the way that brings comfort to your sleep tonight. That is to shrug your shoulders and pronounce that everything is just a coincidence. That ancient tribes and modern Americans, separated by thousands of years, accidentally shared the exact same astonishingly detailed type of hallucination. That thousands of independent witnesses suddenly gathered to lie about the same thing at the same location. Or you can use Occam's razor, the most fundamental principle of logic. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. And the simplest explanation here is, something is truly there. The earth at Shasta is designed with enough complexity to contain it, and it has been there long enough to imprint itself onto the history of humanity on the surface. We don't know for sure what it is. But you know, an incomplete investigation doesn't mean the case is closed. It means we must continue to dig deeper until our shovel blades hit the truth, or something glowing in the dark. Imagine you are camping on the slopes of Mount Shasta. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. The bone-chilling cold of Northern California is gnawing at every joint of your bones. Everything is submerged in a thick blackness. And then, from a hidden corner of a jagged black boulder that you swear had no entrance this afternoon, a light flares up. It leaks from fissures, from cracked vents on the ground. The openings seem to part, exhale a stream of light, then close again. Don't be quick to think of Hollywood's green flying saucers. We are talking about something more realistic and therefore far more terrifying. The light emitted from the heart of Mount Shasta is one of the most persistent, most frequently repeated features in all witness files to date. But this is what leaves physicists scratching their heads: the nature of that stream of light. Normally, light is a big mouth. A campfire hidden deep in the forest will hurl its chaotic light onto every branch, every leaf, diffusing and bouncing from surface to surface. But the light at Shasta does not. Panic-stricken witnesses, whether in the 1920s or 2020s, describe it with an astonishing physical characteristic: coherence. It does not diffuse. It goes in a defined direction, cutting through the night and retaining its form in space. It doesn't look like flickering firelight seen through leaves. It looks exactly like a stream of light casting out from a window, a directional emission from a purposeful source. Naturally, skeptics will immediately hurl the Encyclopedia of Biology in our faces. "That's bioluminescence, Mr. Zorro," they will shout like that. True, Mother Nature has her magic tricks with light. Look at the Waitomo cave system in New Zealand, where millions of fungus gnat larvae create a gorgeous, fake, starry sky underground. Or will-o'-the-wisp mushrooms, mineral crystals absorbing radiation and glowing faintly. But use your sharp reason to shave down those arguments. Biological light always carries a characteristic blue or green color, hazy, ghostly, and weak. The light at Shasta. Witnesses swear it is too directional, too powerful. It carries a warm color, sometimes brilliant like golden aura, sometimes a neutral white. If you were a resident of an underground network for millennia, you wouldn't sit around waiting for glowing mushrooms to read books. You would exploit the massive geothermal chemistry beneath the mountain. Refining natural chemical reactions over thousands of years is entirely capable of generating a stable, sustainable, directional light source without needing Thomas Edison's alternating current grid. This light is not absolute proof that people live there, but it is a perfectly anomalous puzzle piece fitting with spine-chilling precision into the hypothesis of an intelligent underground community. You and I, we have dived into this story long enough to begin seeing through the illusion, shave away the flesh of the peripheral tales. The witnesses' clothing may vary, their language may carry the colors of different eras. Their cultural reference framework stretch from Indian legends to the New Age movement. That is just the flesh. Look at the skeleton of the story. What do you see? An intact and cold skeleton. A physical encounter. Observation. The ruthless rejection by academic organizations. The unextinguishable persistence of the accounts. The tight geographical concentration. No matter who they were, in 1800 or 2000, when they approached this mountain, they experienced the same catalog of events. This does not resemble the behavior of an inanimate volcanic mass. This colossal volume of evidence paints the portrait of a conscious entity, something that has been there for a very long time, watching us, and being extremely cautious in controlling how it exposes itself to the surface world. It survives by becoming a ghost. It is nearly invisible, nearly silent. How to hide a massive secret from the prying eyes of 8 billion people on the surface. The strategy of perfect stealth. If I were the mayor of that city beneath the mountain, I wouldn't build defensive walls. I would use the very arrogance of the people on the surface as a weapon. I would occasionally appear in an extreme flash before certain individuals. People whom I know for certain that when they return to report, their society will laugh at them. I would let legends, mystical cults sprout like mushrooms around the mountain, wrapping my physical truth in layers of fog from spiritualism and stories of the lost continent of Atlantis. This strategy has worked perfectly. It is ruthlessly effective. The physical truth beneath Mount Shasta is protected, not by steel gates underground, but by the very conservatism of the surface world. Every time some serious researcher carries a shovel close to the truth, our system automatically boots up the crushing machine. Data is dismissed, implied threats to careers are made, and scholars are forced to shelve the truth if they want to continue receiving paychecks. The secret of the mountain is kept tight because we on the surface are the most excellent accomplices. We bury the truth for them with our own hands. Myth has swallowed reality, turning encounters of the flesh into harmless spiritual illusions. Whether this is a perfect plan of manipulation from below, or just the result of humanity's habit of shunning anomalies, the outcome remains unchanged. Darkness still blankets it. And beneath that thick snow cover, stone windows occasionally part slightly, radiating a tranquil golden light, patiently observing our madness and complacency. Do you know what the most terrifying type of evidence is in any mystery investigation? Not wild testimonies, nor blurry, grainy photos. The most terrifying evidence comes from those who touched the truth and then automatically dropped their hands, stepped back, and chose to keep silent forever. Let's talk about the ghosts in the media, people who hauled cameras, voice recorders, and heaps of funding money to the foot of Mount Shasta, certain they would strip the mask off this mountain. But then, right on the boundary of discovery, they abruptly turned around. In the mid-90s, a veteran documentary filmmaker came to Shasta, planning to stay for just a few days to shoot footage for a project on sacred lands. The outcome? He took root there for 3 solid weeks, collecting invaluable rolls of tape. But when the film debuted, absolutely not a single second of Shasta appeared. Why? Years later, he confessed that including that material in the film brought him a terrible feeling to his very bones, a sense of violation, like accidentally picking up the most intimate diary of a stranger. You have the right to publish it. The information within is true, but deep in your conscience, something invisible throttles your throat, growling, "Don't do it." Or take the case of a fierce female investigative journalist. She spent months digging through archives, interviewing geologists and anthropologists about Shasta for an in-depth magazine piece. The truth-revealing article was resting right on her desk, polished down to every period and comma, ready to be sent to print. Then she froze. She told her editor she needed more time with this material, and she never returned to it again. What the hell is going on here? This is not the behavior of bloodthirsty newshounds. The greatest desire of the press is to expose. But when facing Shasta, that instinct is broken, replaced by a strange restraint, an irrational hesitation. They didn't stop out of fear of physical threats. They stopped because of a sense of wrongness preceding all logical arguments. What did they uncover? What did they sense beneath that ground that made them voluntarily lock their own mouths shut? Perhaps that great secret is nurtured and maintained by the very lifeblood of the mountain: water. Elementary geography books tell you that melting snow from Shasta's summit pours down, forming the Sacramento River. That is the surface. But in the underworld, the story carries a completely different shade. A colossal volume of water never surfaces. It infiltrates the volcanic rock layer, porous as a sponge, slipping into a complex, intertwined underground hydrological system that has never been fully mapped. Water can be imprisoned down there for decades, even centuries, soaking within geological strata to absorb unique minerals that form a distinct signature, before surging up at springs dozens of miles away. See the big picture now? If there is an underground civilization, they by no means lack water. They hold in their hands a perfect, endless water supply network spanning the entire region. The springs around the base of the mountain, where encounter reports frequently occur, happen to be the most accessible natural taps of this underground system. The survival infrastructure for a large-scale society was built ready by nature, designed perfectly down to every line of rock. And this forces us to look back at our greatest arrogance, the grand lie about pre-Columbian American history. Mainstream history still loves to drone on about the image of a sparsely populated North America, where indigenous people only knew hunter-gathering, living in rudimentary social structures. The truth: ancient America was a continent busy and complex to the point of breathlessness. Did you know the city of Cahokia in the Mississippi River Valley was once larger than London, the capital of England, at its peak? Agricultural systems, trade networks spanning thousands of miles connecting every corner of the continent. The region where Mount Shasta is situated was not some desolate middle-of-nowhere area. It was a super crossroad, a convergence point of four colossal ancient cultural zones: the California coast, the Great Basin, the Pacific Northwest, and the Southwest Desert. This grand mountain was a landmark piercing the sky, a reference station in the consciousness of peoples across the entire far western part of the continent. If Shasta truly hid an underworld, that secret couldn't just rest in the heads of a few local tribes. Information about it was transmitted along ancient trade routes, radiating far away. The legends about the tunnel system beneath the foot of Shasta are not a curious local tale. It is the remnant of a continent-scale epic about the complexity and depth of North America before the ships of Europeans brought bloody disruption. A grand buried tale that we are only just stammering to learn to spell. And so, we return to where everything began. Mount Shasta, towering over 14,000 feet, still stands there, a cold and quiet block of stone thrusting into the Northern California sky. It continues to attract curious people, stifling their reason and turning that curiosity into a fierce, burning belief that something ancient, patient, and intensely alive reigns inside. Something that was there long before the first lines of official history were ever written. Are those tunnels real in a physical sense? Does that underground society exist? We cannot officially stamp verification yet, but we certainly cannot continue to blindly dismiss it into the trash can of paranoia. The evidence has never been evaluated squarely. This case is not closed. It is an open wound in the pride of academia. Shasta deserves a real investigation. The witnesses deserve to be heard instead of being thrown pitiful glances. Native legends need to be decoded as archives of precise data observations across thousands of years, not a bunch of bedtime fairy tales. Geological anomalies deserve to be systematically dissected. Open questions are always the most interesting, most spine-chilling ones, because they carry the power to change the entire foundation of our reality. The mountain stands there patiently, embracing its secrets. Perhaps it is waiting for a day when the surface world has enough tools, courage, and above all, intellectual honesty to look directly at it without blinking or turning away in cowardice. We have not reached that day yet, but the question is still alive right there. And that much is enough for us to keep digging.